Whatever you remember about Sonny Liston, Sonny Liston, I think, was possibly the greatest intimidator of all time. I've seen him stare guys down where they were so scared, climbing up the ring steps, they could barely get in the ring. There are two things you definitely don't know, and that's when he was born and how he died, because these are two mysteries nobody ever solved. In his prime, he was a hulking beast of a man who terrified everyone he faced. But then, he fought Muhammad Ali twice and lost both times, and his career went downhill from there. And this is the story of his enigmatic and ultimately tragic life, and the unexplained way it ended. Sonny Liston was probably the most intimidating man ever to lace a pair of gloves. He had an aura of invincibility and used his abnormally long reach and 15-inch fists to smash up everyone he faced on his relentless march towards the top of the heavyweight division. At one time, he was considered unbeatable. He was too strong, too tough, and hit too hard. But where Liston went, controversy always followed. And just a few years after reaching the top, he was found dead in his home, a rotting corpse that had already been there a week before it was discovered. Like so much connected to his life, controversy and conspiracy surround the circumstances of his death, and we'll get to that in good time. But first, let's look at his early years and his rise to the top. Before we come to his fall, Sonny Liston was a man who never had anything easy, and his start in life was far from promising. He was born Charles Liston in the state of Arkansas, one of his father's Toby's 25 children, and one of his mother Helen's 13 at the time. The state did not require birth certificates to be issued, so there is no record of his birthday, or even the year he was born, although it was probably sometime around 1930. Liston's father was in his mid-40s when he married Helen, who was then still a teenager, and he was possibly as old as 70 when Sonny was born. Liston later recalled that his father beat him severely, and even as an adult, the scars from the whippings he received as a child were still visible on his body. There appears to have been little affection between Liston and his father, with Liston remembering, "The only thing my father ever gave me was a beating." When he was around 13, Liston's mother left his father and moved to St. Louis. At first, Liston stayed with his father, but he soon left to join her. At first, Liston attended school, but he was bullied for his illiteracy and soon gave up any hopes of getting an education. Instead, he turned to crime, and the path for the rest of his life was set. Liston got involved with mugging and armed robberies, and having been caught by the police after holding up a diner into gas stations, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, while it was almost inevitable that Liston would be locked up, there was also a touch of fate in what happened, because it was during his incarceration that he discovered boxing. Behind bars, he quickly learned that punching people in the face with those enormous fists was something he was more than just moderately good at. Liston's prowess in the ring helped him secure an early parole, and after just 2 years, he walked free to embark on a short but successful amateur career. But by then, his talents had caught the attention of some more unsavory characters, and when it came to raising the money to launch his professional career, the man who put up the cash was John Vitale. Vitale was a member of the St. Louis crime family, so from his first days as a pro, Sonny Liston was controlled by the mob. Liston's professional career started well and included good victories against some tough opponents, although he suffered a shock defeat in only his 8th fight. But the whole time, he was also closely connected with organized crime. And outside the ring, he worked as an enforcer for the mob. He continued to have run-ins with the police, who by this time knew him well. And the effects of constant police harassment came to a head when he assaulted a cop who stopped him, breaking his knee, cutting his face, and taking his gun. This in another incident that saw him leaving another cop appended in a garbage can, saw him rewarded with another stint behind bars, this time on his release. The police made it clear that if he stuck around, he wouldn't be alive for much longer, so he left St. Louis for Philadelphia to pursue his boxing career there instead. At around this time, Liston's contract was taken over by the notorious mobster Frankie Carbo and his associate, Frank Blinky Palermo. Carbo, in particular, was heavily involved with the darker side of boxing, and significantly, he was in control of Liston's career. In the run of fights leading up to his shot at heavyweight champ Floyd Patterson, the problem for Liston was that his mob connections were well known, and his brushes with the law were no secrets either. In Philadelphia, he was arrested twice more, once for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest, and once for impersonating a police officer. And although he didn't do any more time, these incidents only enhanced his villainous reputation. As a result, he was an almost universally reviled figure, and this made it much harder to secure his shot at Patterson. For one, the civil rights group the NAACP didn't want Patterson to fight Liston because they felt if a man like Liston became heavyweight champion, it would harm their movement. And even President John F. Kennedy advised Patterson against facing Liston. Patterson himself stated that he wanted to fight Liston, but that the bout wouldn't happen until Liston rid himself of his ties to the mob. Another possibility is that Patterson's manager, Cus D'Amato, was doing everything he could to avoid Liston because he knew his man would lose if the fight took place. If that was true, Patterson wouldn't be the only heavyweight champion in boxing history to have enjoyed a padded record. And a couple of more recent examples also spring to mind, not to name any names. In the end, though, Patterson couldn't avoid him forever. Liston did what was necessary, changing his management team and ostensibly cutting his ties with his mafia handlers. And eventually the fight was made. When it took place, it lasted just over 2 minutes, with Patterson putting up little resistance before being flattened by the bigger, stronger man. So Sonny Liston, the most despised man in boxing, was heavyweight champion of the world, and the backlash was vicious. The abuse and slurs that Liston faced in print were unrelenting, but perhaps worse was the moment he stepped off the plane back in his adopted hometown of Philadelphia as heavyweight champ, expecting cheering crowds, only to be met by nobody but hostile members of the press. It was a moment of rejection and disappointment that Liston felt keenly, and soon after he relocated to Denver. Patterson was given a rematch, but the second fight lasted only for seconds longer, with the same result, and still Liston received only disdain from upset fans. Part of the problem was that he was now seen as unbeatable, and he was expected to reign as the unwanted heavyweight champion for many years to come. But nobody was counting on a loudmouth boxer known as the Louisville Lip, an upcoming 22-year-old prospect by the name of Cassius Clay. No serious observers gave Clay a chance of beating Liston, and the young boxer's antics in the build-up that saw him taunting and teasing Liston left many bewildered. The general consensus, though, was that Clay was terrified and possibly unhinged. But then, when they stepped into the ring, the unthinkable happened from the first bell. Clay gave Liston arguably the hardest round of his career, using his speed to stay out of range, but landing powerful combinations whenever he could. He was still looking good by the fourth, but then one of the major talking points occurred. When he returned to his corner, with something burning in his eyes, Clay wanted to pull out, but his trainer sent him out for the fifth, just telling him to run, and he survived the round by backpedaling away from Liston for the whole 3 minutes. By the start of the sixth, whatever was in his eyes had cleared, and he attacked Liston with renewed aggressiveness. And then, to everyone's shock, Liston failed to rise from his stool for the seventh, and Cassius Clay was crowned champion. Did Liston's team deliberately try to blind Clay? Anna Megan, one of Liston's former opponents, later said he experienced something similar. So it's possible, but more importantly, why did Liston quit? Officially, it was due to an arm injury. Some reports say Liston had injured his arm during training, and it's also possible that he had been suffering with shoulder pain for over a year. Others say that Liston tore a ligament during the fight and no longer had use of the arm. Yet others say he threw the fight, and his connections to Frankie Carbo, a known match fixer, lend weight to this theory. Even if Liston had supposedly cut ties with the mob, or perhaps he overlooked Ali, undertrained, and was just looking for a way out. But if the first fight was contentious, the rematch with Muhammad Ali, as he was known by then, would go down as one of the most controversial bouts of all time. As everyone knows, Ali won that fight by KO in the first round, with his so-called phantom punch. And one of the most iconic images in the history of sport was captured when Ali was pictured bellowing down at his fallen opponent. The problem was almost nobody saw the punch land, and debate has raged ever since about whether Ali delivered a genuine knockout blow, or if Liston threw the fight, perhaps for the second time. After Liston went down, chaos ensued. The referee was unable to cajole Ali back to the neutral corner, and so couldn't take up the count. The timekeeper counted Liston out, but according to the rules, the count doesn't begin until the fighter, still standing, is in the corner, so no count should have taken place. By the time Ali was under control, Liston was back on his feet, and the fighters once again started to box. But then the timekeeper motioned to the referee that he had completed the count, at which point the referee jumped in to stop the fight and award Ali the victory. On balance, most boxing fans believe that something fishy was going on, and those who believe Liston was knocked out are harder to find than those who believe Liston threw the fight. But whether this was due to mob interference, the threat from the Nation of Islam, the black nationalist movement that Ali had joined, or something else, is unknown. Or perhaps Liston simply no longer had it. As with much else about Liston's life, there's no shortage of conspiracies to explain the events of that night. But Liston would take the answers with him to the grave. And in the event, it was only a few years later that it happened. After the Ali bout, Liston continued to box, but despite a couple of good wins, he never recaptured any titles. Then only around 5 years after he lost his heavyweight crown, his decomposing body was discovered in his home by his wife. Judging by the newspapers and milk bottles outside, police estimated that Liston had been dead for around a week, and the cause of death was officially listed as lung congestion and heart failure. But with Liston, nothing was ever that simple, and there are just as many theories about his death as there were about the phantom punch, if not more. When police arrived to investigate, they also found a balloon of heroin in the house and a small amount of marijuana in Liston's pocket. The police sergeant claimed that Liston was a heroin addict and that everyone on the force knew about it, and a drug overdose could certainly be a possible cause of death. Police found no drug paraphernalia in his house, but the first people his wife called upon discovering his body had been his doctor and his attorney. So it's possible they hid such items before the police arrived. Liston's body was to decomposed for the toxicology report to confirm or deny the overdose theory. But a small mark on his arm that could have been from an injection supports this idea. But then others say Liston had nothing to do with drugs, and Johnny Toko, Liston's last trainer, maintained that Liston was terrified of needles and would never have injected himself. Another possibility is that his lifelong association with the mob had caught up with him, and he had been taken out in a hit. Toko also tells a story of when the pair were in a coffee shop during the build-up to his final fight, when Liston unexpectedly met and then left with some strangers. The next day, one of the strangers returned and said something to Toko that convinced him Liston had agreed to throw the fight. But when confronted, Liston dismissed the idea, telling his trainer he was going to knock his opponent out. In the event, this is exactly what he did, and it's possible his death was a hit arranged as retribution for not throwing the fight. As agreed, or perhaps it was revenge from a drug dealer who suspected him of being an informant. Or perhaps he had a seizure and died naturally. As Taco chose to believe, Liston was an enigma, and his life was full of contradictions. Although he was among the most feared men ever to step inside the ring, his wife described him as gentle and kind, and great with kids. But then he certainly had a temper, and he was often unable to control it when dealing with police, and he allowed Ollie, then Clay, to goad him into a rage before their first fight, perhaps affecting the outcome. Liston remained illiterate throughout his life, but was supposedly highly intelligent. And it's a small tragedy that he was bullied out of school when he was just trying to get an education, something that pushed him towards a life of crime. But perhaps the biggest tragedy of his life was what happened after he became heavyweight champion, only to be denied the respect and admiration he felt he had earned. He had prepared a speech for the waiting crowds in Philadelphia, a speech he never gave, having escaped from such tough beginnings to capture the heavyweight crown. He spoke to friends about how he wanted to change people's perceptions of him as heavyweight champion. He wanted to visit orphanages and reform schools, and he wanted to inspire people with his story of success. He was hurt that even black boxing fans disliked him, and he wanted to be given the chance to change their minds. To friends he spoke of how proud it made him feel when he used to hear people say that former champion Joe Louis had been a credit to his race, and above all Liston hoped people would one day say the same thing about him. But due to his violent background and his connection to the mob, the public and press never gave him a chance, and so he died in mysterious circumstances, as perhaps one of the most tragic and misunderstood men in boxing. What do you think? How did Liston die? Was he murdered, or did he die a natural death? And what about the alley fights? Did he throw them? What's your take? We'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let us know in the comments below. And if you like the video, please don't forget to hit the like button and give us a follow before you go. See you in the next one.